Thank you. Well, good afternoon. I want to welcome you to Washington, D.C. I'm one of the few people who you're probably going to hear from who's actually from D.C. Actually born and raised, however, in New York. Sorry to give any New Yorkers here. There we go. Ooh, okay. I'd be worried about New York. I've lost my New York City survival skills. I'm not sure I could hang out there anymore. Thank you, Nick, for that warm welcome. It is a pleasure for me to be here with you all today. Now, I know that given the recent election that many people are discouraged. Too many people are filled with fear, and many are seeking ways to ensure that a progressive vision for our country not only survives, but flourishes over the next 4 years. Now, wishing and hoping that that happens is not going to get it done. Dedication, hard work, and fearlessness are going to be required. Now, the one thing that we can't do, and I want to make this really clear, confrontation must not reflexively be avoided, all right? There may be times where we're going to have to just take people on. I'd like to speak with you today about a means by which I think we can make our country more fair and ensure that recent concrete progressive gains do not become only fond memories. Now, I was 14 years old when President Lyndon Johnson signed the landmark Voting Rights Act into law. Now, although I hadn't even started high school, the significance of that moment wasn't lost on me. Generations of Americans had willingly confronted hatred, bias, and ignorance, as well as billy clubs, fire hoses, and bullets to ensure that I would have the right to vote in just a few years, to ensure that all their children would have a chance to participate in the work of their government, and to ensure that American citizens would live in a better and more fair world. Now, that August day in 1965, when President Johnson signed the law, he proclaimed, and I want to quote this is very important, he said, "The right to vote is the basic right, without which all others are meaningless." Think about that, meaningless. Now, I have held on to those words. I've held on to those words for over the last half century. I've held on to those words because they are quite simply right. Everything from social equality to equitable economic growth is in some ways connected to the right to vote. In 2013, an ideologically driven Supreme Court, in a two-common 5-4 decision, wrongly struck down a key part of the Voting Rights Act. States with legacies of racial discrimination no longer need to obtain federal permission before changing election laws or regulations. It represents really a serious setback for voting rights and has already negatively affected millions of people in this country. Now, shockingly, the decision came at a time when nearly everyone outside that beautiful building where the Supreme Court sits, everybody outside that building recognized that work still remained in ensuring equal voting rights for all. Now, Congress itself, in reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act, almost unanimously had recognized that racial and language minorities faced significant voting discrimination in parts of our country. And as Attorney General, I brought several successful voting rights cases. In fact, according to the Brennan Center for Justice, in just the final 18 months before the Shelby ruling, at least 13 laws were blocked by DOJ administrative action. And over a 6-year period, 262 voting changes were withdrawn or altered after the Justice Department merely asked jurisdictions for more information on whether the changes were discriminatory. Now think about that. All we did was ask them the question about whether or not it was. Just ask the question. Just give us some information. 262 times they said, well, never mind. And that's the law that the Supreme Court gutted. Now these figures alone demonstrate that a need for a vital and intact Voting Rights Act was and remains clear. The Shelby decision has had ramifications in all areas of voting rights law, including ongoing voter suppression efforts that we've heard so much about. But its effect has also been felt very acutely in the process of redistricting. Now, since Shelby, localities have already begun redrawing district lines to diminish the influence of minority and Democratic voters. Now, I've met a lot of you from Texas, and it's a great state, but boy, you all really try some stuff down there. Galveston County, Texas, revised a redistricting plan to elect justices of the peace that had been previously blocked by the Justice Department because it discriminated against minorities. Pasadena, Texas, also redrew its city council districts in a way that diminished the influence of Latino voters, even though Latinos now make up 62% of the population in that city. And Pasadena's plan, too, had previously been rejected by the Justice Department before the Shelby County decision. Now, recent Republican redistricting efforts have been unconscionable, but they have been ruthlessly effective. They have turned the system on its head, and they've made it possible for politicians to select their voters. We think of our system as where we vote and we vote for, who we want to represent us. Well, the way the system has now been turned around is that politicians, through redistricting, can figure out who they want to have vote for them. In Wisconsin, in 2012, Republican candidates for the state assembly won less than half the vote that was received, but only got 66 of the assembly's 99 seats. So less than half of the votes, but got 66 of the 99 seats. In 2012 in North Carolina, Democrats got 51% of the vote for the United States House of Representatives, but only got 4 of the 13 congressional seats. The same was true in Pennsylvania, where Democrats won about a quarter of the House seats that were available, though they got a majority of the votes cast in congressional races in the state that year. Now, with all of these setbacks in voting rights, setbacks that come more than 50 years after one of the most significant leaps forward, people ask me all the time, well, what gives me hope? What allows me to hold on to President Johnson's words? Well, what gives me hope first is watching our lower courts stand on the side of justice. With the ramifications of Shelby, the ramifications cannot be underestimated. But we must not forget that lower courts play an important role in guarding this most precious of civil rights. Lower courts have already recognized, in spite of Shelby, that the work of the Voting Rights Act is far from over. For example, in blocking a Texas congressional redistricting map that would have discriminated against Latino voters, the D.C. Circuit noted that the parties, and I'm quoting again, provided more evidence of discriminatory intent than we have space or need to address here. Now, these are federal judges. These are pretty conservative people. You don't see that kind of language even in private conversations. They put this on paper and in a decision. A couple of weeks ago, as was referenced before, a federal district court in Wisconsin found that the state legislature's 2011 redrawing of state assembly districts was an unconstitutional gerrymander. Now, although federal courts have struck down gerrymanders on racial grounds, this was the first time a court had struck down a gerrymander on the ground that it unfairly gave advantage to a political party. The court said that redrawing had created a sizable disparate effect of Republican gains in the state assembly. But the even more hopeful part of that decision is how the court got there. The ruling offered for the very first time a clear mathematical formula for measuring inappropriate partisanship in redistricting efforts. Now, if this becomes a nationwide standard, our legislatures could be transformed. And just last week, a district court in North Carolina ordered that new legislative maps be redrawn by March of 2017, and that special elections be held under these new maps in the fall of 2017, fully a year before the regularly scheduled elections, in order to address the inappropriate redistricting done by the North Carolina legislature. And we can say goodbye to Governor McCrory. I understand that he has conceded. So what also gives me hope is working to effect change. During my stay in post-government life, I am determined to focus on redistricting in the hopes of halting gerrymandering in states across our country. Now, we heard a lot this election about a so-called rigged system. Remember that? Rigged systems, rigged elections. But the biggest rigged system in America is gerrymandering, a system where the lines are drawn not to represent American communities, but to benefit politicians. Ending gerrymandering is a cause that speaks to me. It's also a cause that President Obama himself hopes to embrace after his term in office. And it is a cause that all people, Republicans as well as Democrats should get behind. To this end, I decided to serve as the chair of the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. Now, this is a new central hub for redistricting strategy with the mission of evening the playing field by 2020 and continuing thereafter. Now, this is an unprecedented new effort that brings together leaders from across government as well as from civil society. With the NDRC, we will set priorities for investing in key races for governor, state legislatures, and other key down-ballot races. And consider this, for example. There are more than 36 gubernatorial races taking place in the next 2 years. In many states, governors can veto redistricting schemes. Fixing our redistricting problem, then, is not just about focusing on the lines, but focusing on the larger effort to win back governance. With the NDRC, we will also look at where we can get involved in ballot initiatives to ensure progressives have a seat at the table when redistricting comes about. And with the NDRC, we'll also pursue legal strategies to create fairer maps, following in the footsteps of what the courts have done in Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, as well as Wisconsin. We need to increase your numbers. That is the bottom line. But drawing maps is really a complicated endeavor. So the question is, where do we even begin? And this is a question that my colleagues and I are carefully considering. But let me offer just a few thoughts. For one, we should consider who draws the lines. We saw what happened when Republicans drew the maps in 2010. We got a House seat in Ohio that was only contiguous at low tide. I'm not making this up. We had a House seat in Virginia that could only be connected by a boat ride on the James River, and a House seat in Michigan that was shaped like a contorted snake. We got a House of Representatives with a disproportionate number of Republicans. We should consider how we draw lines. Should we have criteria? Well, how about making sure that people who live near each other and who have similar interests, how about if those folks all vote in the same district? That's kind of simple. We should consider where we draw lines. So much of both the Democratic Party's focus and the progressive focus has been at the federal level. This is a mistake. This is a mistake. We need a comprehensive approach that looks up and down the ballot. It should be clear to all now that we need to rebuild from the state level. In fact, to create a more representative Congress, we must realize that the action is in the states where maps are drawn. And focusing on the local level, our school boards, our city and county council members, our justices of the peace, has far more reaching impact than we appreciate. Our state and local leaders are the leaders that we interact with, the leaders that impact our daily lives, the leaders that mold our values. So let's move the conversation to the states and to localities. And finally, and I think most importantly, what gives me hope is you, SiX. I decided to join all of you today because you are exactly the people that President Obama and we're going to need as we move forward with our work. Your very name recognizes that the fight is in the states where the basis for change resides. As state leaders, you are the ones closest to the attacks on voting rights. You are our eyes and our ears. You are at the front lines of societal change, shaping America from the grassroots up. Now, never forget, economic growth, social equality, and political fairness, and policies to spur them are inextricably bound to the ballot box. I urge you to keep fighting to ensure that the ballot box is a place of equal power for all Americans. Now, our nation achieved unprecedented change when President Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act more than 50 years ago. Every American should take, I think, justifiable pride in that act. But we must resist the temptation to conclude that our nation has reached the point of full voting equality. We know better than that. The effort to harmonize our laws and our policies with our best ideals is not yet done. So as we move forward with the NDRC, I call on you to help at the state level. We need your vision. We need your skill. We need your counsel. We must work to make more fair the political processes that control the selection of our representatives, while at the same time advocating for progressive policies. We can and we must do both. Now, this need not be a period of retreat or defeat. If we stay focused, if we stay resolute, and if we stay true to our principles, I'm confident that we can make the coming years a foundation for an enduring progressive era. And I look forward to working with all of you in the months and years to come. Thank you very much.